Martha Johnson had lived on Willow Creek Lane for more than 40 years. The little blue house at the end of the cul-de-sac wasn't just a home to her, it was her safe place, filled with memories of her late husband, her childhood photographs, and the laughter of neighbors who once stopped by for sweet tea on the porch. It was where she had raised her son, Marcus, who grew up playing football in the front yard and chasing fireflies on warm summer nights. At 72, Martha moved slower than she used to. Years of arthritis and an old back injury had left her dependent on a wheelchair for most of her daily tasks. Despite that, she found ways to make her life beautiful. Every morning, she wheeled herself to the front porch to watch the sun rise, enjoying the soft colors painting the sky. Her garden, full of daisies and tulips, was her pride and joy. She had planted each flower by hand before her injury, and though she couldn't tend to it like before, she still tried to water them whenever she could. Willow Creek used to feel like family. The neighbors once looked out for one another. People exchanged holiday cards, shared homemade pies, and came together for block parties. But over the years, the neighborhood had changed. New families moved in, and the Homeowners Association, commonly called the HOA, started enforcing stricter rules. The HOA claimed they wanted to improve property values and keep the community beautiful, but to Martha, it felt like they were making life harder for anyone who couldn't afford expensive upgrades. Her house was old but well kept, though the paint on the fence had started to chip, and the wheelchair ramp her son had installed years ago had faded under the sun. She had planned to fix it someday, but her limited income made big repairs impossible. One sunny afternoon, Martha received a letter in her mailbox from the HOA. The paper was crisp, the words printed neatly in bold black ink: "Your property does not meet community standards. You are required to repaint your fence, remove the wheelchair ramp, and update your garden landscaping within 30 days. Failure to comply will result in fines." Martha sighed as she read it. The cost of repainting the fence alone would drain her savings, and removing the ramp was out of the question. It was her lifeline to independence. Without it, she wouldn't even be able to leave her home safely. The weeks after the second HOA letter passed slow. The days after the special community meeting were tense but hopeful. For the first time in months, Martha felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now waved when they passed her porch. Some stopped by to offer support, bringing flowers, baked goods, or simply kind words. "I didn't know what they were doing to you, Martha," said Mrs. Green, who lived 3 houses down. "We should have stood up sooner." Martha smiled warmly, though her voice trembled. "Thank you. It means a lot to know we're not alone anymore." Marcus, meanwhile, wasn't slowing down. He spent long hours reviewing documents, making phone calls, and meeting with officials. His goal wasn't just to protect his mother's home anymore. He wanted to ensure no one else in the neighborhood would go through the same struggle. One morning, he received a call from the county zoning office. "Mr. Johnson," the clerk said, "our board has reviewed your findings, and we've opened a formal investigation into the HOA's activities. We also found irregularities in their financial records. We'll be conducting a full audit." Marcus thanked her calmly, but inside, he felt a surge of relief. Finally, the truth was coming into the light. The HOA, however, wasn't staying quiet. A week later, the board sent out another letter to all residents, this time inviting them to vote on whether to approve the park project officially. The vote would take place in 2 weeks, and every homeowner had a say. Marcus immediately recognized what they were trying to do. If they can get enough votes, he explained to his mother, they'll have permission to move forward legally, and that would make it harder to fight them. So, he came up with a plan. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus went door to door, speaking directly to the neighbors. He showed them the documents, explained how the board had bypassed proper procedures, and revealed the financial connections between the HOA and the construction company. Many residents were shocked. "They tried to take your mother's home without even telling us," one man said, shaking his head. That's not right. Another woman frowned. I thought the park was for the community, but if this is about profit, we need to know where our money's going. By the time the voting day arrived, most of the neighborhood had heard Marcus's side of the story. The HOA held the vote at the community clubhouse. The atmosphere was tense, the room filled with quiet murmurs as residents lined up to cast their ballots. Martha sat near the front, her hands resting gently in her lap, while Marcus stood beside her, calm but watchful. When the votes were finally counted, Richard Whitman stepped forward to announce the results. His usual confident smile was gone. The proposal for the park expansion has not been approved, he said reluctantly. The project will not move forward at this time. A wave of relief spread through the room, and several residents clapped softly. Martha closed her eyes, whispering a quiet prayer of thanks. But Marcus knew this wasn't the end. The county audit was still ongoing, and there were deeper questions that needed answers. 2 weeks later, the results of the audit were released. The findings shocked the entire neighborhood. The report showed that several HOA board members had authorized large payments to a private construction company owned by a relative of one of the members without properly disclosing it to the community. It also revealed that multiple inspections and fines had been targeted specifically at properties the board wanted to acquire for the park project. The county officials announced that the HOA board would be restructured. A special election would be held to choose new leadership, and stricter transparency rules would be put in place to prevent abuse of power in the future. When the news reached Martha, she sat silently for a long moment before looking up at Marcus with tears in her eyes. They can't take our home now, can they? She asked softly. Marcus shook his head with a gentle smile. No, Mama. This house is yours and it's staying that way. The weeks that followed brought big changes to Willow Creek. A group of residents formed a new committee dedicated to protecting homeowners' rights and ensuring every decision was discussed openly. Marcus attended several of the meetings, helping set up guidelines for fairness and communication. Neighbors began working together again, repairing fences, planting flowers, and organizing small community events. For the first time in a long time, the street started to feel like home again, not just for Martha, but for everyone. One afternoon, Linda stopped by carrying a small basket of homemade cookies. She sat on the porch with Martha, watching the sunlight dance across the freshly painted fences. You know, Linda said with a smile, this neighborhood feels different now. People are talking again. Helping each other. It's like the old days. Martha nodded, her gaze soft. It feels lighter. Like we can breathe again. Marcus walked out onto the porch, joining them with a warm smile. That's the way it should be. A few weeks later, the special HOA election was held, and the residents voted in a new board made up of people who genuinely cared about the community. Richard Whitman and several former board members stepped down quietly, choosing not to run for re-election. During the first meeting under the new leadership, the board passed a resolution ensuring that seniors, disabled residents, and low-income homeowners would receive extra support instead of penalties whenever property repairs were needed. When the announcement was made, Martha couldn't hold back her tears. For the first time, she said softly, I feel like someone's listening. Marcus placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. That's because they finally are. One bright Saturday morning, Marcus surprised his mother with something special. Mama, he said, standing in the yard with a small wooden post in his hand, I've got a little gift for you. He walked to the front of the house and planted the post firmly in the ground. On it was a handcrafted sign, carefully engraved with simple words, this home stands. So does she. Martha gazed at the sign, her eyes filling with tears, and smiled through them. This means more than you know, Marcus, she whispered. He smiled back. It means we don't give up. Not ever. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the soft glow of the streetlights filled Willow Creek, Martha sat on the porch wrapped in a light blanket. She listened to the distant laughter of children playing, the hum of cicadas, and the peaceful quiet she had missed for so long. For the first time in months, her heart felt calm. Her home was safe. Her community was healing. And she knew, deep down, that everything they had been through had brought them closer not just as mother and son, but as neighbors, too. As Marcus sat beside her, the two of them watched the stars slowly appear in the night sky. There were still challenges ahead, but now, they weren't facing them alone. The little blue house at the end of the lane still stood, strong and unshaken just like the woman who called it home. The morning sun peeked through the blinds as Marcus sat at the kitchen table, a stack of documents spread out before him. His mother's letters, photographs, inspection reports, and the county records he'd collected were neatly arranged in piles. He had barely slept the night before, but his mind was sharp, piecing everything together like parts of a puzzle. Across the table, Martha quietly sipped her tea, watching her son with gentle eyes. "Marcus," she said softly, "you've done enough already. I don't want you worrying yourself over this." He looked up at her, his voice steady but kind. "Mama, this isn't just about fines or fences anymore. They've been pressuring you for a reason. I found the plans. They want to expand that community park right onto our property." Martha's brow furrowed. "But why wouldn't they just ask me? Why all these letters and notices?" Marcus sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Because if they can make it seem like your house doesn't meet their standards, they can push you to sell. It's easier to convince someone to leave if they feel trapped." Martha stared down at her hands for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. "I've lived here most of my life, Marcus. I don't want to lose this house." He reached across the table, gently placing his hand over hers. "You won't, Mama. I promise." Marcus knew promises weren't enough, he needed proof. That afternoon, he walked through the neighborhood, paying close attention to details he'd never noticed before. There were surveyor stakes in more than 1 yard, small wooden markers with bright orange ribbons tied around them. He stopped at the corner where Linda's yard met their property and noticed a fresh stake planted there too. When Linda came out carrying a watering can, Marcus waved. "Linda," he called, "do you know what these markers are for?" She glanced at them and shook her head. "No idea, Marcus. But I've seen workers around the neighborhood the past few weeks measuring things and marking the ground. I thought it was for road maintenance." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "I think it's bigger than that." Back at home, he pulled up the county website and downloaded more documents about the proposed park project. The plans showed an expanded playground, walking trails, and a small pavilion, and right in the middle of it was a section that matched his mother's backyard exactly. "This is it," he murmured to himself. "This is why they're doing all this." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for Thursday evening, and Marcus planned to be there. He spent the next few days preparing carefully. He organized every letter, every photograph, and every document he'd collected into a binder. He even printed copies of the county park plans, highlighting the sections that showed his mother's property. Before the meeting, he sat with Martha on the porch, explaining his plan. "Mama," he said gently, "I need you to stay calm during the meeting. I'll do the talking. We're not going to argue or raise our voices, we're just going to present the facts." Martha nodded slowly, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "I trust you, Marcus." That evening, the community clubhouse was buzzing with voices as residents gathered for the meeting. Marcus wheeled his mother inside, guiding her toward the front row of seats. People glanced their way, whispering softly, but Marcus kept his focus forward. When it was time for public comments, Marcus stood and addressed the board. "My name is Marcus Johnson," he began clearly. "I'm here with my mother, Martha Johnson. We've lived in this neighborhood for over 40 years. I'd like to understand why my mother has been receiving more notices and inspections than anyone else here." Richard Whitman, sitting at the center of the board table, adjusted his glasses and smiled politely. "Mr. Johnson, as I've said before, we're simply enforcing community standards. We treat every property equally." Marcus opened his binder and held up a page. "Is that so? Because according to these inspection reports, my mother's property has been inspected 5 times in the past 2 months, more than any other home on this street." A murmur spread through the room as residents turned to look at one another. Richard cleared his throat. "There have been concerns raised about the property's appearance." Marcus nodded calmly. "Concerns from who?" Richard hesitated. "From several residents." Marcus looked around the room. "Can anyone here confirm they filed a complaint about my mother's home?" Silence. Not a single hand went up. Marcus continued, his tone even but firm. "I've reviewed the county records. The HOA recently filed a proposal for a new community park, and according to the plans, the project would extend into my mother's backyard. Isn't it true that these constant notices and inspections are part of an effort to pressure her into selling?" Richard shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the other board members. "Mr. Johnson, this meeting is not the place to discuss development projects." "With respect," Marcus said steadily, "this meeting is exactly the place. The HOA is supposed to represent the residents, not push them out." Several neighbors nodded in agreement, and the room began to hum with quiet discussions. Seeing the growing attention, Richard finally said, "We'll review your claims and respond in writing within a week." Marcus gave a short nod and sat back down beside his mother, who squeezed his hand gently. After the meeting, several neighbors approached Marcus and Martha in the parking lot. "Marcus," one man said quietly, "I didn't know they were planning a park. If what you're saying is true, they've been keeping us in the dark." A woman nearby added, "You're not alone in this. If they're trying to pressure you, we'll stand with you." For the first time in weeks, Martha felt a spark of hope. But Marcus wasn't celebrating yet. He knew the HOA wouldn't give up easily. The next few days were tense. Marcus noticed unfamiliar cars parked at the end of their street, and sometimes he caught sight of people standing near their property line, writing notes. He began documenting everything: dates, times, and descriptions, building a record of every activity. One morning, while reviewing the HOA's financial statements online, Marcus discovered something unusual: large payments to a construction company that wasn't listed in any public announcements. Curious, he dug deeper and learned that the company was tied to one of the HOA board members. "This isn't just about a park," Marcus muttered. "Someone's profiting from this." He carefully compiled his findings, printing bank records and highlighting suspicious payments. By the end of the week, he had enough evidence to bring to the county zoning office. At the office, a clerk reviewed the documents and frowned. "Mr. Johnson, if what you're saying is correct, some of these approvals weren't handled properly. There should have been public hearings before any development plans were finalized." "Exactly," Marcus said. "And none of us were notified." The clerk nodded. "I'll escalate this to the zoning board immediately." Back at home, Marcus updated his mother on everything he'd discovered. "Mama," he said gently, "I think we have enough to stop them. But it might take time." Martha smiled softly, reaching for his hand. "I don't care how long it takes, Marcus. I just want to stay in the home your father and I built." "You will," he promised. The following week, the HOA sent out another letter, this time inviting all residents to a special community meeting to discuss the future of Willow Creek. Marcus knew it was about the park project and the push to acquire properties like his mother's. He spent the next few days preparing carefully. He gathered his evidence, organized his documents, and spoke to neighbors one by one, explaining what was really happening. Many were shocked to learn the truth, and by the night of the meeting, dozens had agreed to attend in support. When the evening arrived, the clubhouse was filled to capacity. Residents packed the rows, murmuring among themselves as Marcus and Martha entered quietly. At the front, Richard Whitman cleared his throat and began his presentation about the park, showing slides of walking trails and playgrounds. Before he could finish, Marcus stood and addressed the crowd. "Before we talk about new parks and projects," he said clearly, "we need to talk about how this affects our homes. Some of us were never informed about these plans, and my mother has been unfairly targeted because her property falls right in the middle of the development area." Gasps rippled through the audience. Marcus held up copies of the county plans and financial records. "These documents show that money has already been spent on construction contracts tied to members of this board. And there's no public approval for any of it." Residents began murmuring loudly, turning toward the board with questioning looks. Richard tried to calm the room. "Mr. Johnson, please, we can discuss this privately." "No," Marcus said calmly, "this involves every homeowner here. They deserve the truth." By the end of the meeting, the residents demanded a full review of the park project and the HOA spending. Several volunteered to form an independent committee to oversee the process, and the county zoning office confirmed they would investigate. As the crowd left the clubhouse, Martha sat quietly in her wheelchair, holding her son's hand. "You stood up for us, Marcus," she whispered. "Your father would be proud." Marcus smiled gently. "This isn't over yet, Mama. But we're closer to the truth now." And deep inside, he knew the fight had only just begun. But for Martha, each day felt heavier than the last. Every time she rolled her wheelchair onto the porch, she noticed little changes in the neighborhood, things she never used to pay attention to before. The morning was quiet on Willow Creek Lane, but inside Martha's little blue house, there was no peace. She sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly, staring at the letter that had arrived the night before. It wasn't like the others. This one wasn't about fences, ramps, or gardens. It said the HOA had scheduled an emergency board review regarding her property. The meeting was set for the following week, and the letter warned that the board would discuss possible actions if she failed to meet the community's visual and safety standards. Martha's chest tightened as she read it again and again. She didn't know what possible actions meant, but the language unsettled her. For days, she tried calling the HOA office for answers, but no one returned her messages. When she saw Richard Whitman in the neighborhood, he gave her a polite nod but didn't stop to speak. It felt as though decisions were being made behind closed doors, decisions that involved her, but without her voice in the room. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She called Marcus. This time, she told him everything. Every letter, every inspection, every photo they'd taken. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then Marcus's calm voice, steady and deep, came through. "Mama," he said firmly, "I'm coming home." She tried to protest. "Marcus, you don't need to," "I said I'm coming," he repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. 2 days later, Marcus was on a flight back from his Navy base overseas. When Marcus arrived at Willow Creek, the first thing he noticed was how different the neighborhood felt. The street he grew up on, where kids used to ride bikes and neighbors gathered for summer barbecues, now seemed unusually quiet. The lawns were perfect, the fences freshly painted, but the warmth was gone. He parked in the driveway and walked up to the porch, where his mother sat in her wheelchair, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Marcus," she exclaimed, holding out her arms. He bent down and hugged her gently, holding her close for a long moment. "I'm here now, Mama," he whispered. Inside, over a cup of tea, Martha showed him everything: the letters, the inspection reports, the photographs, even the notices about fines. Marcus listened carefully, his expression calm but thoughtful. "They've been sending you all this?" he asked, flipping through the stack of papers. She nodded, her voice low. "Every week, it feels like there's something new. I've tried, Marcus. I've done everything I can, but it's never enough." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening slightly. Don't worry. We'll figure this out. That evening, Marcus took a slow walk around the property. He examined the fence, the ramp, and the garden. It was true the paint had faded, and the ramp showed its age, but everything was safe and well kept. There was nothing here that could justify the constant pressure his mother was under. As he walked back toward the front yard, he noticed something unusual: fresh tire tracks in the dirt near the edge of the property, as though someone had been parked there recently. He also saw a small camera mounted on a street light across from the house, its lens aimed directly at their yard. He frowned. That's new, he muttered to himself. The next morning, Marcus decided to pay the HOA office a visit. The building was just a short drive away, a small brick structure with a neat sign out front. Inside, the air smelled faintly of coffee and paper. At the front desk, a receptionist greeted him with a polite smile. Good morning. How can I help you? I'd like to speak to Richard Whitman, Marcus said evenly. It's about my mother's property. The receptionist glanced at a calendar on the desk. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman isn't available today. Can I take a message? Marcus nodded but handed her his card anyway. Please let him know Marcus Johnson stopped by. I'd appreciate a call back. Back at his mother's house, Marcus began making notes of his own. He wrote down the dates of every letter, every inspection, and every notice she had received. He even photographed the property, carefully documenting everything from different angles. That evening, he called Linda, their next-door neighbor, who had always been kind to his mother. Linda, he asked, do you know if anyone's complained about my mom's house? Linda hesitated for a moment. Marcus, I probably shouldn't say this, but, yes. At the last HOA meeting, a few people brought up your mom's property. They said it didn't fit with the rest of the neighborhood anymore. Did anyone actually complain about safety? Marcus pressed. No, Linda said softly. It was all about appearances. Marcus thanked her and hung up. That night, as he sat on the porch with his mother, the soft chirping of crickets filling the silence, he spoke quietly. Mama, I think this is bigger than a few chip fences. I think they want your property. Martha looked at him, startled. Why would they want my little house? He shook his head slowly. I don't know yet. But I'm going to find out. A few days later, Marcus attended the emergency board review meeting with his mother. The room was filled with HOA members and several neighbors. At the front, Richard Whitman sat behind a polished wooden table, his papers neatly stacked. As the meeting began, Richard welcomed everyone and immediately moved into the agenda. When it came to Martha's property, Marcus stood up before his mother could say a word. My name is Marcus Johnson, he said confidently. I'm Martha's son, and I'd like to understand why my mother has been singled out for repeated inspections and notices. Richard adjusted his glasses and replied calmly, Mr. Johnson, we're simply ensuring that all properties comply with community standards. Marcus nodded slowly. I understand community standards. But I've looked through every letter you sent. Not once have you explained why her home is being inspected more than anyone else's. Can you explain that now? The room fell quiet for a moment. Finally, Richard spoke. We've received multiple concerns from residents about the condition of her property. Marcus glanced around the room. Which residents? No one answered. A few people looked down at their papers, others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Marcus continued, his tone steady but firm. I've served this country to protect people's rights, including my mother's. And I won't stand by while she's treated unfairly. After a long pause, Richard said carefully, Mr. Johnson, we'll review this further and provide a detailed report next week. Back home, Marcus felt something wasn't right. The vague answers, the silence from the other residents, the sudden inspections, it all pointed to something more than simple neighborhood rules. Late that night, he sat at the kitchen table, sorting through his notes and photographs. That's when he spotted something unusual in one of his own pictures, a small marker stake, barely visible in the corner of the yard. Curious, he went outside with a flashlight and found several more markers along the edge of the property. He realized they weren't random, they outlined a straight line that ran behind the house. "Mama," he said quietly when he came back inside, "I think they're planning something here. Something big." Martha looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "I think the HOA wants to develop this land," Marcus explained. "If they can make your house look like it doesn't meet their standards, they could pressure you to sell." Martha sat back in her chair, her eyes wide. "But this is my home." Marcus placed a reassuring hand on hers. "I know, Mama. And I promise you, we're not going anywhere." Over the next few days, Marcus began digging deeper. He visited the county records office, searching through public documents. There, he discovered something alarming. The HOA had recently filed an application for a new community park project, and the plans showed that part of the proposed park would extend onto several private properties, including his mother's backyard. Suddenly, everything made sense. The inspections, the notices, the pressure, it was all designed to make her feel overwhelmed, to push her into selling her home. Marcus closed the file, his mind clear. "Now I know what they're after," he whispered to himself. What he didn't know yet was how far the HOA was willing to go to achieve their plan. And soon, he was going to find out. More expensive cars lined the driveways. Freshly painted fences gleamed in the sunlight. New flowers bloomed in perfectly arranged gardens. It seemed like every house on Willow Creek Lane was transforming into something new, except hers. Her little blue house looked the same as it always had, neat and cozy, but simple. She had always believed it was enough, but now she felt like her home was being measured against impossible standards. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't keep up. Every few days, another envelope from the HOA appeared in her mailbox. Sometimes they were reminders. Sometimes they were warnings. Each one carried the same cold, formal tone, as though her years of living there didn't matter at all. One morning, she opened an envelope to find photographs of her house printed inside. Someone had taken pictures of her fence, her ramp, and her garden. Notes were scribbled under each image: fence paint chipping violates code. Ramp color inconsistent with community design. Garden overgrowth needs maintenance. Martha stared at the photos, her stomach tightening. It felt personal now. Someone wasn't just sending letters, they were watching her closely. Later that afternoon, she saw a man standing across the street holding a clipboard, his phone in his hand. He seemed to be taking pictures of her house. Martha hesitated for a moment, then called out politely, "Excuse me, can I help you?" The man looked up briefly but didn't answer. Instead, he walked away toward a black SUV parked at the corner and drove off. Martha wheeled back inside, her heart uneasy. She had lived there for decades, yet suddenly, she felt like a stranger in her own home, as if the place she loved was slowly turning against her. Days later, another notice arrived, this one marked final warning. It stated that if she didn't comply with the HOA's demands, they would begin issuing weekly fines and consider taking legal steps. Martha decided she couldn't stay quiet anymore. She called the HOA office directly and asked to speak to Richard Whitman, the president. The receptionist transferred her, and after a few rings, Richard's calm voice came on the line. "Mrs. Johnson," he said evenly, "how can I help you today?" "Mr. Whitman," Martha began softly, "I've been trying my best to take care of my home. But I can't afford all these changes, and I physically can't manage the work on my own. I need more time. Please." Richard paused for a moment, his tone polite but distant. "I understand your position, Mrs. Johnson, but the rules are designed to protect the value of everyone's property. If we make an exception for you, we'll have to make exceptions for everyone. But my situation isn't the same as everyone else's, she said quietly. I'm not asking for special treatment. I just need understanding. There was a short silence before Richard replied, I'll bring your request up at the next board meeting. But I can't promise anything. When the call ended, Martha felt no relief, only uncertainty. That evening, as she sat in her living room, the house unusually quiet, she thought of Marcus. She hadn't told him everything. He was serving overseas, focused on his duties, and she didn't want him worrying about her. But as the pressure from the HOA grew, it was becoming harder to hide the truth. She picked up her phone and stared at his contact photo, his confident smile in his navy uniform. She whispered softly to herself, I wish you were here. A few days later, she received another HOA letter. But this time, it wasn't just about fines or warnings. It said there would be a mandatory inspection of her property in 2 weeks. Members of the board would be walking through her yard to assess compliance issues. Martha folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table, trying to steady her thoughts. An inspection meant more photos, more notes, and probably more demands. She didn't know how much more she could take. The following morning, she decided to attend another HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. The room was crowded with residents, many of whom seemed eager to discuss landscaping projects, driveway upgrades, and community events. Martha quietly waited until public comments began. When it was her turn, she rolled forward and addressed the board. I want to be a good neighbor, she said softly. I've always tried to take care of my home. But the recent notices, they've been very hard on me. I'm on a limited income, and I can't make all these changes at once. I need your patience and maybe some help. A few residents nodded sympathetically, but Richard's expression remained neutral. We understand your concerns, Mrs. Johnson, he said. But we have to apply the same standards to everyone equally. That's what keeps this community strong. Before she could respond, another board member added, there are contractors who can handle repairs for you. You might want to consider hiring one. Martha managed a polite smile but said nothing more. Contractors cost money she didn't have, and it was clear the board wasn't going to bend the rules. As she left the meeting, she overheard 2 residents talking quietly near the door. Did you hear about the Johnson place? One whispered. They're saying it's bringing property values down. Martha's heart sank. She had always been proud of her home. To hear it spoken of like that felt like a personal wound. In the days leading up to the inspection, Martha tried to do what little she could. She watered her garden, trimmed the hedges as best she could, and wiped down the wheelchair ramp. But repainting the fence or replacing the ramp was beyond her ability. One evening, her next-door neighbor, Linda, came over carrying a basket of freshly baked muffins. Martha, she said gently, I've seen the letters they've been sending you. It isn't right. Do you want me to talk to them for you? Martha smiled weakly. Thank you, Linda, but I don't want to cause trouble. I just want to live peacefully. Linda placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. If you need anything, I'm here. Her kindness lifted Martha's spirits for a moment, but deep down, she sensed that bigger challenges were coming. The day of the inspection arrived. 3 HOA board members showed up, clipboards in hand. They walked around her yard slowly, writing notes, pointing at her fence and ramp, and taking photographs without saying much. Martha watched from the porch, her hands resting on her lap, her heart beating steadily but heavily. When they were done, Richard approached her with a practiced smile. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Johnson. You'll receive an official report within a few days. After they left, Martha sat in silence, staring at the soft glow of the setting sun. She felt as though her home, her sanctuary, was slowly slipping away from her. That night, She finally called Marcus again. "Baby," she said softly, her voice trembling, "I need you to come home soon. Things here, they're getting harder." Marcus immediately picked up on the worry in her tone. "Mama, what's going on? Talk to me." "I'll explain when you're here," she whispered. "Just promise me you'll come." There was a pause on the other end before Marcus replied firmly, "I promise." Neither of them knew it yet, but that promise would change everything. In the days ahead, the HOA's decisions would reach a point Martha never imagined. And by the time Marcus returned, nothing in Willow Creek would ever be the same. A few days later, Martha attended the monthly HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. It was held in a brightly lit room with polished floors and neat rows of chairs. Most of the board members were new residents, younger families with high-paying jobs who had recently moved into the neighborhood. At the center of the long table sat Richard Whitman, the HOA president, a tall man in his 40s with neatly combed hair and an air of authority. When it was Martha's turn to speak, she rolled her wheelchair to the front of the room, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Whitman," she began softly, "I got your letter. I understand you want the neighborhood to look nice, but I live on a fixed income. I can't afford to repaint the fence right now, and I need the ramp to get out of my house. Please. I just need a little more time." Richard leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Mrs. Johnson, we all have to follow the same rules. If we let one person slide, then everyone will want an exception." Another board member, a woman with pearl earrings, added, "The ramp isn't exactly in line with the neighborhood's aesthetic. We're trying to maintain a certain image here." Martha felt her cheeks warm, but she kept her composure. "The ramp is there because I can't walk well. Without it, I'd be stuck inside." Richard sighed, flipping through his papers. "I'm sorry, but rules are rules. 30 days. After that, we'll have to issue fines." Martha left the meeting with her heart heavy, the cool evening air brushing against her face as she rolled down the sidewalk. She had lived there longer than most of the people sitting at that table, yet suddenly she felt like a stranger in her own neighborhood. Over the next few weeks, Martha noticed subtle changes around her. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away when she passed. A few whispered quietly on their porches as she rolled by. One afternoon, she heard someone murmuring, "Why doesn't she just sell the place and move somewhere else?" But this was Martha's home. It was the house where she and her late husband had built a life, where Marcus had grown up, where every room carried memories. Selling wasn't an option. Then came the second letter. This one was sterner than the first. "Final notice, failure to comply with HOA guidelines will result in immediate fines of $250 per week. Further non-compliance may lead to legal action." Martha stared at the page, her hands trembling slightly. She called Marcus that evening, her voice shaking. "Baby," she said softly, "they're saying they're going to fine me. I don't know what to do." On the other end of the line, Marcus, stationed overseas for his Navy assignment, tried to stay calm for his mother's sake. "Mama, don't you worry. I'll handle it when I get back. Just, don't let them scare you, okay?" Martha nodded, though tears welled in her eyes. "I'm trying, sweetheart." But the pressure only grew. The HOA started sending inspectors to take photos of her property. She noticed them early in the mornings, standing at the edge of her lawn with clipboards, jotting notes without so much as a hello. Her mailbox filled with notices almost daily, each one colder than the last. Evenings became lonely. Martha would sit by the window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one, wondering if things would ever go back to the way they used to be. She longed for the sense of community she once had, the neighbors who brought over casseroles when she was sick, the laughter of children playing outside without fear of being told to keep the noise down. One Saturday morning, Martha decided to attend the HOA's monthly yard inspection tour, hoping she could speak with Richard directly. She wheeled herself across the sidewalk toward a group of board members gathered near her property. "Good morning," she said politely. Richard turned, giving her a tight smile. "Mrs. Johnson. I wanted to ask," she said gently, "if there's any assistance program for seniors or disabled homeowners. I want to comply, but I simply can't afford all these changes." A few members exchanged glances, but Richard shook his head. "I'm afraid not. The HOA isn't responsible for personal financial situations. We expect everyone to meet the same standards." Martha's voice wavered slightly. "But I've lived here for decades. This is my home. I've done my best to keep it up. I'm asking for understanding." Richard's tone stayed polite, but his words carried no warmth. "I understand your position, Mrs. Johnson, but we have to think about the neighborhood as a whole." That night, Martha sat at her kitchen table long after the sun had set, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Bills and HOA letters lay scattered across the table. She stared at them, her fingers tracing the edges, wondering how things had gotten so difficult. She thought about Marcus and how she hated to burden him. She thought about the memories in every corner of this house: her husband painting the walls, Marcus taking his first steps, the smell of Sunday dinners that once filled the kitchen. Martha was tired, but she wasn't ready to give up. She whispered to herself as she looked out the window at her little garden, "This is my home. I belong here." What Martha didn't know was that the HOA's pressure was only beginning. Behind closed doors, plans were being made, plans that would push her to the edge and test her strength like never before. And far away, thousands of miles overseas, Marcus was preparing to come home, unaware of just how much his mother would need him.